What happens when a self-assured top manager brings his young mistress in a red dress to the most important meeting of his career to impress his enigmatic new billionaire boss? Little does he know that the woman entering the meeting room, surrounded by lawyers and carrying a folder of evidence of his infidelities and financial fraud, is his own wife. Before we continue, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your opinion inspires us to create better videos. The alarm went off at 6 in the morning, a soft electronic chime for a man who was sure the whole world was waking up for him. Roger Coleman, however, had been awake since 5:30. His mind was racing, calculating options, plotting strategies. Today wasn't just another Tuesday. Today was T-Day, the day of the takeover, the day of change. He abruptly threw back the Egyptian cotton duvet and sat on the edge of the king-size bed. The temperature in the penthouse was maintained at a perfect 20 degrees Celsius. Across the spacious bedroom, his wife, Elizabeth, was already up, but not yet dressed. She was wearing a faded Yale sweatshirt and sweatpants, her honey blonde hair pulled back into a messy bun. She stared at her tablet, her brows furrowed. "Coffee?" Roger muttered. It wasn't a request, more of a casual command. "Good morning," Elizabeth muttered without looking up. "The machine is already on." Roger snorted and walked barefoot across the cold marble floor to the bathroom. He paused at the floor-to-ceiling picture window. Below, 50 stories below, Chicago was a grid of twinkling lights. The pre-dawn sky over Lake Michigan was a deep purple. His city. "You look tense, Elizabeth," he called, his voice echoing throughout the bathroom as he turned on the multi-jet shower. "Is it about the charity event? About the guest list for the senator?" "Don't worry, my assistant will handle it." "It's not about the charity event, Roger," she replied quietly, but with tension in her voice. "It's about the Harrison Foundation's financial documents. There are discrepancies in the reports from Zurich." Roger rolled his eyes, obscured by clouds of steam. The Harrison Foundation was her little project. When Elizabeth's father, Richard Harrison, a mid-level tech magnate, died 5 years ago, he left her a sizable inheritance. Roger had encouraged her to take over the foundation. It kept her busy without interfering with his real job, climbing the corporate ladder at Global Transit Solutions, a global logistics giant. "Let the bankers handle it, my dear," he said, stepping into the scalding water. "That's what we pay them for. You're too smart to worry about spreadsheets. Leave that to the accountants." He didn't hear her answer. 40 minutes later, Roger was the epitome of corporate power. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the knot of his dark grey tie. His suit was tailored, and his shirt cuffs were held in place by platinum cufflinks. He was 45, but he looked 35, with sharp features, sharp blue eyes, and a thick head of dark hair that he knew his mistress loved to run her fingers through. He returned to the living room. Elizabeth was still sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open. She looked pale. "Roger, we need to talk. I called Henry Stanford last night." Roger stopped, genuinely irritated. Henry Stanford, her father's dusty old lawyer, the family's long-time consultant. "Elizabeth, I have absolutely no time for this. Today is the most important day of my career. The new CEO is flying in today." Global Transit Solutions was acquired, a swift and shocking hostile takeover by some shadowy company, a private equity firm no one had heard of, EX Ventures. For 3 weeks, the entire executive floor was in a panic. Who was behind EX? A Russian oligarch? a young genius from Silicon Valley? Roger, however, wasn't worried. He was vice president of international sales. He was the one who brought in the money. He was the one who made global transit profitable enough to become a takeover target. This new CEO wouldn't fire the goose that laid the golden eggs. No, today was his audition for an even higher position, perhaps COO. This is important, Roger. We're talking about our financial structures. Everything is not what it seems. He finally looked at her, really looked at her. Tired eyes, a sweatshirt with a small stain on the cuff. This was the woman he was returning home to. He felt a sudden, sharp feeling, not guilt, but impatience. He was thinking about Nicole. Nicole Ashton, 26, sharp, ambitious, and now she was waiting for him in the lobby of her house, the house Roger was paying for, looking like a supermodel. "Elizabeth," he said, softening his voice the way one might speak to a confused child. "Whatever it is, it can wait until tonight. I promise we'll open a bottle of that Pinot you like." He kissed the top of her head. Her hair smelled simple, like shampoo, nothing special. He grabbed his leather briefcase. "I'll be back late. Don't wait for me." "Roger, wait." She stood up. "I need you to know. Whatever happens today, I have to go, darling." "I love you," he said, as the elevator doors opened into their private lobby. When the doors closed, he was already on the phone. "Nicole, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Wear a red dress. No, not burgundy, bright red, like a traffic light. I want you to make an impression." He hung up, a genuine smile appearing on his lips for the first time. Today wasn't just a day to secure his future, it was a day to present himself. He'd been grooming Nicole for months, feeding her information, allowing her to help with his biggest accounts. The old guard at Global Transit saw her as a beautiful distraction. Roger saw her as his new, improved partner. He'd even created a title for her, Special Assistant to the Vice President. It was perfect. Today, he would introduce her to the new director as his indispensable assistant, the future of the company. She was smart, yes, but more importantly, she reflected his taste, his power, his vitality. His black Mercedes-Benz C-Class pulled up to the curb outside her home in Streetville. Nicole stepped out, and Roger's breath caught in his throat. The red dress was a masterpiece, hugging every curve. Her black hair was a sleek curtain, her makeup flawless. She was pure, undiluted ambition. She was perfect. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman," she purred as she climbed into the front seat. The scent of expensive perfume filled the cabin. "Good morning, Miss Ashton," he replied, his hand immediately landing on her knee, squeezing it tightly. "Are you ready to meet the new king?" "Ready," she whispered, leaning closer. "But I think he's already here, next to me." Roger laughed, a deep, satisfied laugh. He merged into the traffic, heading toward the Global Transit building. He felt invincible. He was a predator at the top of the food chain, and today was the hunt. He pitied the old managers, shaking with fear in the conference room. They had no idea how the game was played. But Roger Coleman, in his arrogance, forgot the first rule of the jungle. There's always a predator you can't see. The conference room on the 88th floor of the Global Transit Tower was designed to be intimidating. A huge slab of polished obsidian served as a table, surrounded by 20 tall leather chairs. One wall was entirely glass, affording a heavenly view of Chicago. The mood inside, however, was more sacrificial than divine. Roger and Nicole arrived last. This was intentional. He wanted to make a dramatic entrance. "Roger!" hissed David Chen, the CFO, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a month. "You're barely making it. The EX are supposed to be here at 9 sharp. "Relax, David," Roger said, heading to his usual spot, 2 chairs away from the head of the table. He pulled out the chair next to him for Nicole, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Maria Gonzalez, the company's chief operating officer and a 20-year veteran, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Nicole, this is a Level 10 management meeting. Is your presence required?" Roger smiled, showing all his teeth. "Miss Ashton is my new special assistant. She played a key role in the fourth quarter forecasts that so impressed EX Ventures. She is here at my request." Nicole sat down, radiating a confidence that was 90% Roger's and 10% her own. She placed a dainty red leather notebook on the black desk, a perfect, sharp splash of colour. She was a lover, yes, but she was also a very good student. She knew Roger was using her as a show of strength, and she was more than happy to be a pawn capturing a queen. The room was filled with the nervous energy of the condemned. Whispers spread across the table. "I heard that EX is backed by a 30-year-old tech billionaire from Austin." "No, my source says it's an old money family from Boston, the Harrisons." "The Harrisons? I thought they were small fry." "West Coast, not East." Whoever it was, they bought the company in cash. No credit, just a bank transfer. Who does that? Roger simply listened, a slight smirk playing on his lips. He was allowing them to panic. He had already secretly conveyed his loyalty to the new regime through the transition lawyers. He sent a private memo, subtly undermining his colleagues while simultaneously highlighting the streamlined efficiency of his department. He pointed out David Chen's excessive caution in accounting and Maria Gonzalez's outdated logistics models. He leaned toward Nicole, his voice a low rumble. "See? Fear. That's the smell of mediocrity." "We don't smell like that, do we?" "No, Roger," she whispered back, her foot brushing against his under the table. "We smell like the future." He was just about to answer, to tell her about the bonus he had already mentally spent on a new penthouse for her, when the heavy oak doors at the end of the conference room swung open. The room fell silent, absolutely deathly silent. The first to enter were 2 men in dark, formal suits. They were lawyers, radiating an aura of billable hours worth more than the price of a small car. They separated, standing on either side of the door. Then came the sound of heels on the marble floor. Click, 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 click. It was a slow, measured, commanding sound. It wasn't the nervous thump of a secretary or the hesitant tap of an assistant. It was a rhythm that said, "I own the land I walk on." Roger, like everyone else, stood up. He smoothed the front of his jacket, crafting a first impression, respectful, interested, irreplaceable. A woman appeared in the doorway. Roger's brain, spinning at 1,000 revolutions per minute, simply stopped. Like a film projector stuck on a single frame, the shot was this. A woman. Her hair, no longer a tousled honey-blonde bun, was a sleek, sophisticated ash-blonde cut reaching to her chin. She wore a dark blue suit that looked more like armor than clothing, with a simple white silk blouse underneath. No jewelry, save for a pair of simple diamond earrings and a wedding ring. Her face. It was Elizabeth's face, but all the softness was gone. The vague, absent-minded gaze was replaced by one as sharp and cold as the view from the window. She wasn't pale. Her makeup was flawless, professional. She looked formidable. Roger's mind raced, trying to process the data. This was Elizabeth, but it wasn't her. There was a mistake. She was here for the charity gala. She'd walked into the wrong room. She was lost. He opened his mouth. A confused, pitiful greeting was already forming on his lips. But before he could speak, one of the lawyers stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Board of Directors, thank you for your time. Please be seated." Everyone sat stiffly. Roger half slumped in his chair, his eyes locked on his wife, who was walking, no, marching, to the head of the table. Nicole leaned in, her voice a tiny, confused whisper. "Roger, isn't this?" Roger couldn't answer. His throat tightened. The blood roared in his ears, the sound like the ocean. The woman reached the head of the table. She set down her thin silver laptop and surveyed the room. Her gaze slid past David Chen, past Maria Gonzalez, past the other terrified vice presidents. Then her eyes settled on Roger. They lingered for an agonizing second. There was no recognition, no anger, no betrayal in them. There was nothing there. It was the look a CEO gives a piece of furniture. Then her eyes slid to Nicole, to the red dress, to the hand Nicole placed protectively on Roger's. For a split second, the corner of the woman's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. It was the premonition of a smile. The lawyer spoke again. "I have the honor of introducing you to the sole owner of EX Ventures, the new chairman of the board of directors and CEO of Global Transit Solutions, Ms. Elizabeth Harrison." The name hit Roger like a physical blow. Harrison was her maiden name. EX Ventures. Elizabeth Harrison. The room was filled with stunned, shocked silence. David Chen's mouth was literally open. Maria Gonzalez looked like she'd been slapped in the face. And Roger Coleman just watched. "Elizabeth." "Miss Harrison." She smiled a bright, cold, reptilian smile. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice clear and strong, no trace of the quiet murmur he'd heard 3 hours earlier. "I apologize for the abrupt nature of this transition. It was necessary. Now, let's get to work. I've been reviewing the fourth quarter forecasts, and frankly, I'm terrified." Her eyes found Roger again, and this time they held him, especially in the international sales department. The world in Roger Coleman's head shrank to a single pulsing point of sound, the click of Elizabeth's heels. The air in the conference room, once chilled to a perfect 20 degrees, now seemed suffocating. He couldn't breathe properly. His $5,000 suit, his armor, felt like a woolen coffin. "Roger," Nicole whispered again, her voice no longer a purr. It was sharp, laced with the first stab of panic. "Roger, what's going on? It's your wife." "Shut up," Roger hissed, his voice cracking. He looked at Elizabeth, but the woman at the head of the table was a stranger. This wasn't the woman who organized charity balls. This wasn't the woman who worried about guest lists and gluten-free meals. This wasn't the woman who wore sweatpants and asked his permission to wire money. The woman, Ms. Harrison, was connecting her laptop to the main system. The massive screen at the end of the conference room, usually dark, came to life. There was no welcoming message on it. Instead, it displayed a complex, terrifyingly detailed spreadsheet. "Let's start with the obvious," Elizabeth said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Global transit is a bloated, inefficient relic. For 3 years, the company has been systematically mismanaged, over-indebted, and in some cases actively embezzled." She pressed a button. A new slide appeared, a graph. The thick red line representing expenses soared upward, while the blue line, net profit, stood still. "The numbers you reported to shareholders were fiction," she stated. "A very creative, very illegal fiction." David Chen, CFO, has finally found his voice. "Look, Miss Harrison, our books are checked by Grant Thornton." "Yes, I know," Elizabeth said, without even looking at him. "I also know that your chief auditor, Mr. Stephen Hadley, is your son-in-law, a fact you haven't disclosed." David turned the colour of old parchment. "And you, Ms. Gonzalez," Elizabeth continued, turning to the Director of Operations. "Your logistics department is still using a 2005 dispatch system. You've subcontracted 30% of our domestic shipping to Logie Fast Solutions, which, it turns out, is owned by your son, at a markup of 40% above market rate." Maria Gonzalez recoiled, her face a mask of rage and shock. This wasn't a meeting. This was an execution. Elizabeth picked them apart with cold, brutal precision. She had the documents. She had the bank transfer records. She had the ownership of the shell companies. She had everything. Roger sat frozen. It was impossible. The discrepancies she'd mentioned this morning, the reports from Zurich, Henry Stanford, it wasn't a mistake. It was research. She wasn't worried. She was preparing. His mind flashed with a rapid, terrifying slideshow of memories, her on her laptop late at night. He assumed it was some home-inspired website, those long days at the spa, charity dinners in New York, the trip to visit her sister in Seattle last month. He realized with a sinking, gut-wrenching horror that she hadn't visited her sister. Seattle was home to Amazon and Microsoft. She was meeting with logistics and software experts. She was building her business. And money. A sizable inheritance from her father. Roger always assumed it was several million tied up in trusts, enough to finance her hobby. He was wrong. He was so wrong. Richard Harrison wasn't a mid-level tycoon. He was quiet. He was one of the first angel investors in a small search company in the late 1990s. Roger married one of the richest women in the country, and he treated her like an incompetent intern. "And now," Elizabeth said, her voice lowering, "we move on to the company's star attraction, the International Sales Department." The screen changed. It was a photo of Roger smiling at a golf tournament. Then a new slide, a list of expenses. Mr. Roger Coleman. It was the first time she had spoken his name. It sounded foreign. "You, Mr. Coleman, are a fascinating case. Your sales figures are impressive, almost too impressive." She clicked. "Let's look at the Omega account, your largest client. It accounted for 20% of all new revenue last quarter." Pause. "But the Omega account doesn't seem to exist. The address is a post office box in the Cayman Islands, and the $10 million fee they paid us last month." She clicked again. A complex flowchart appeared. "Our new audit traces it back to a bank in Zurich, my bank." She clicked again. The screen filled with invoices. Rent bills for an apartment in Streetville, Receipts from Cartier for a Panther watch. Expenses for first-class travel for two to Paris for a sales conference that never existed. And finally, an entry in the corporate payroll. Miss Nicole Ashton, Elizabeth said, her voice dripping with ice. Title, Special Assistant. Salary, 250,000. Approved, she enlarged the signature, Roger Coleman. Nicole made a small, strangled sound. She stared at the screen, her face ashen. She wasn't just a mistress, she was evidence. She was Exhibit A in his career-ending scam. Roger, Nicole's voice shook. You told me it was a signing bonus. You said the company approved it. Roger couldn't speak. He was vibrating. The predator had become the prey. The lion's territory was actually a slaughterhouse, and he was hooked. Elizabeth, Miss Harrison, closed her laptop. The screen went blank. She walked slowly away from the head of the desk, her heels echoing in the sepulchral silence. She stopped directly behind Roger. He could smell her perfume. It wasn't the light floral scent she used to wear. It was something dark, expensive and smoky, like sandalwood and ash. She leaned in, her mouth close to his ear. The rest of the room, the other executives, faded away. It was just them. You thought I was stupid, she whispered, her voice so quiet only he could hear it. You thought I was a hobby. You thought I was decor. You thought I was just a wife. He shuddered, a tremor throughout his entire body. You, she continued, her breath warm on his ear, were a project, Roger. A project I ran to see how much incompetence and betrayal I could stand. It turns out I have a limit to my patience. She straightened, addressing the room again, her voice returning to its steely clarity. David, Maria, you are fired. Your breach of fiduciary duty is profound. Security will escort you from the building. Your belongings will be mailed to you. If you challenge this, I will file criminal charges. Am I clear? David and Maria, completely broken, simply nodded. The guards who had been waiting outside the door entered and stood next to them. The rest of you, Elizabeth said, are on probation. You will report to my new Director of Operations, Mr. Henry Stanford, who will be here this afternoon. Henry Stanford, dusty old lawyer, her consultant. Elizabeth returned to the head of the table. She looked at Nicole, who looked like a frightened child in a very expensive, very red dress. Miss Ashton, Elizabeth said, your position here is redundant, as is your presence. Security. One of the guards turned to Nicole. Miss, please come with me. Nicole looked at Roger, her eyes wide with despair, and for the first time, pure, undiluted hatred. Roger, say something. Tell her. Roger looked at his wife, his director. Elizabeth simply watched him, one eyebrow raised, a glimmer of cruel amusement in her eyes. Go ahead, the look said. Protect her. Roger Coleman looked down at the obsidian table, at his pitiful reflection. He said nothing. A small, broken sob escaped Nicole's lips. You bastard. She grabbed her red notebook and ran out of the room, the guard following her. The room was now empty except for Roger and the remaining terrified vice presidents. Roger was the last one, the elephant in the room. He was shaking. And you, Mr. Coleman, Elizabeth said, tapping her pen on the table, you're not fired. Roger's head jerked up. A tiny, wild spark of hope flared. She still loves me. This is a test, a power play. She still— "Oh no," Elizabeth said, as if reading his mind. "Firing you is too easy. Firing you is a gift. You don't get gifts, Roger." She smiled. It was the coldest, most terrifying thing he had ever seen. "You, Roger, are staying. You will report to me. Your international sales department has been disbanded. Your new title, let's call it Special Projects Manager. Your first special project? You will personally oversee the full audit and liquidation of every fraudulent account you've created. You will dismantle, piece by piece, every lie you've ever told this company. And you will do it from the intern's cubicle on the 12th floor." She leaned forward. "You'll come here every day. You'll park in the general lot, not the executive garage. You'll get your own coffee, and you'll watch me build this company, my company, into something you never even dreamed possible. And when you're done, when you've cleaned up every last bit of your dirt, then I'll fire you." She stood up. "The meeting is adjourned. Welcome to the new Global Transit." She turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking, leaving Roger Coleman alone in the dark, silent conference room, a living ghost in a $10,000 suit. The woman Roger Coleman knew as Elizabeth hadn't existed for the past 18 months. The real Elizabeth, Elizabeth Harrison, had been dying, a little at a time, every day, for 10 years. She had slowly, voluntarily, packed herself into metaphorical boxes, labeling them mother, wife, homemaker, philanthropist. The box labelled genius was taped shut and shoved under her bed on her wedding day. Richard Harrison, her father, was no mid-level tycoon. He was a quiet legend in Silicon Valley. He was the algorithm architect behind 3 of the largest initial public offerings of the 1990s. He taught Elizabeth to code before she could ride a bike. He taught her how to read a balance sheet before she could drive. When she graduated from Stanford with a double major in computer science and economics, he made her his CFO. By age 25, she was the shadow CEO of Harrison Capital, managing a portfolio so vast it was almost abstract. Then her father fell ill. Pancreatic cancer, 6 months to go. Around that time she met Roger Coleman. He was a dazzlingly ambitious sales director at a mid-tier tech firm. He was handsome, charming, and seemed to admire her. He was a respite from the grief and crushing burden of the boardroom. When her father died, grief was a tidal wave. Roger was a lifeboat. She married him. She wanted for the first time to be normal, to be cared for. She had children. She stepped back from Harrison Capital, handing over day-to-day management to her father's most trusted advisor, Henry Stanford, and the board of directors in Zurich. She told Roger she ran her father's charity. It was a lie she told to make him feel important. She allowed him to be the breadwinner with his salary from Global Transit, which was her pocket money. She allowed him to build his world, believing he was king, while she was the true source of the kingdom's wealth. Their penthouse was her money. The Mercedes C-Class was her money. His $5,000 suits, all bought with dividends from her portfolio. She was content in her box. She loved her children. She convinced herself that she loved the simplicity, the lack of pressure. The illusion was shattered on a rainy Tuesday in March. Roger was in the shower. His phone, usually guarded as a state secret, vibrated on the nightstand. Text from N. Ashton. "Last night was wow. You weren't kidding about the view from my new apartment." See you at the meeting. The red dress is ready, just like you asked. Elizabeth stared at the text, her heart a cold, unmoving stone in her chest. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the words. My new apartment. She did what she was trained to do. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she collected data. She logged into the private bank account she and Roger shared, the one he thought was their primary account. She saw a transfer of $250,000 to Nicole Ashton, coded as a signing bonus. She saw rent payments for the Streetville apartment processed through an executive discretionary fund. She realized with a cold, sinking horror that he wasn't just using his own money, he was using the company's money. Global Transit's money. She spent the next 48 hours in a trance-like state. She didn't sleep. She just worked. She pulled up the public records of Global Transit. She matched them with Roger's trips. She found the Omega account. And with her experience, it took her less than an hour to find the digital fingerprints. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was committing high-level wire fraud, and he was doing it poorly. He was careless. But the final fatal blow came when she traced the source of the Omega account fee. He hadn't simply stolen from his company. He had, through a series of complex, idiotic maneuvers with shell companies, stolen from hers. He found a back door into one of her family's smaller trust funds, the one she foolishly gave him partial access to for emergencies. He siphoned off millions, not just for Nicole, but for himself, to inflate his sales figures, to make himself look like the king he pretended to be. He didn't just break her heart, he insulted her intelligence. That night, Elizabeth, the wife, died. Elizabeth Harrison, the CEO, was reborn. She flew to Zurich the next day. A trip to a spa, she told him. She met with Henry Stanford in the board of directors of Harrison Capital. I have a new target to devour, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. What is this, Miss Harrison? Henry asked. A software company? A new biotech? A mid-cap logistics firm? Global Transit Solutions. Henry raised an eyebrow. Global Transit? It's a mess. Overpriced, terrible management. Their sales figures are a lie. I know, Elizabeth said. That's why they're vulnerable. The fiction is my husband's work. He's deceiving the company. His fraud makes them ripe for a hostile takeover. We'll buy it. We'll buy everything. This isn't business, Elizabeth, Henry said softly. This is revenge. You're wrong, Henry, she replied, her gaze chilling. Revenge is emotional. It's pest control. He's a cockroach in my house. I'm not just going to step on him. I'm going to buy the building, cover it with a tarp, and fumigate it. The plan was set in motion. EX Ventures was born. It was a division of Harrison Capital, created to be a ghost. They began buying Global Transit shares, first in drips, then in streams, using Roger's own inflated, fraudulent reports to justify the high share price to other sellers. He was essentially helping her buy the rope he would hang himself with. For 18 months, Elizabeth lived a double life. By day, she was the bewildered Elizabeth, planning charity events, managing her children's schedules, and asking Roger for permission to travel. By night, she was Harrison's director, making encrypted calls to Zurich and London, orchestrating a hostile takeover, hiring forensic accountants, and planning the complete restructuring of a billion-dollar company. She cut her hair. She bought a new wardrobe, storing it in a private office she rented downtown under the name Henry. She began to transform, shedding the skin of the woman Roger had rejected. The discrepancies she mentioned this morning. That was the final piece. Confirmation that her money had been used for the Omega account. It was the call to action. She felt a moment of hesitation that morning. A flashback to the 10 years they had, the birth of their children, the early days when he had looked at her with awe. "Roger," she said, "we need to talk. I need you to know—" And he cut her off. "I have to go, darling. I love you." He didn't even look at her. He kissed the top of her head and ran to his lover. At that moment, any remaining doubt, any grain of mercy evaporated. She watched the elevator doors close. She stood in the quiet penthouse for a full minute. Then she picked up her phone. "Henry," she said, "everything is ready. Complete the final powers of attorney and get the car ready. Navy suit. Yes, today is tea day." Roger Coleman's new world was beige. After Elizabeth, Miss Harrison, left the conference room on the 88th floor, Roger remained in his chair for what seemed like an eternity. The other vice presidents rushed out, refusing to meet his eye, as if his failure were contagious. Finally, the guard came in again. "Mr. Coleman, we have been instructed to escort you to your new work location." The walk of shame was a masterpiece of humiliation. He, the former vice president of international sales, was led past the executive wing, past the bustling sales department where his team had previously practically saluted him, and into the service elevator. They went down, 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 down. They got off on the 12th floor, archives and accounting. The 12th floor was a fluorescent hell. The air smelled of stale coffee and dusty paper. There were no floor-to-ceiling windows, only small square portholes looking out onto a brick ventilation shaft. His new office was a cubicle, not even a full cubicle, a beige, half-height fabric rectangle, identical to the 20 others around it. On the desk sat a 10-year-old Dell computer, a plain black phone, and a single stapled document. The document read, "Project Clean Broom, Manager R. Coleman." His Mercedes C-Class, security confiscated the keys. "This is a company rental car, Mr. Coleman. Your rental privileges have been revoked." His parking pass was deactivated. His corporate credit card was declined. Over the next week, Roger Coleman learned the true meaning of power. It wasn't about yelling or firing people. True power was control. Elizabeth, no. He had to stop thinking of her as Elizabeth. Miss Harrison controlled his new reality. He was an outcast. The workers on the 12th floor, mostly older employees awaiting retirement, avoided him. They knew who he was. They knew what had happened. They treated him with a terrifying mixture of fear and pity. His job, as the memo described, was exactly what it threatened. He had to personally catalogue every fraudulent file, every fake invoice, every inflated expense report from the Omega account and the dozens of other clients he invented. He was, in essence, building a lawsuit against himself. He was trapped. If he quit, she would arrest him. If he stayed, he was her prisoner. He tried to fight back. On the first night, he took a taxi to the penthouse. His keycard didn't work. "Mr. Coleman," said the doorman, a man whose name Roger had never bothered to learn. "Excuse me, sir. Miss Harrison's instructions are clear. You are not permitted to enter." "This is my house. My name is on the deed," Roger roared. The doorman looked at him sadly. "Actually, sir, that's not true. The penthouse is owned by a holding company called Harrison Capital. We've been told to remove your name from the list of tenants." She thought about everything. She had been planning this for years. He went to the hotel, the prestigious Langham. His personal credit card was declined. He called the bank. "Sorry, Mr. Coleman," a polite voice informed him. This card was an authorized user account under the primary card holder, Elizabeth Harrison. Your user privileges have been revoked. He ended up at a Holiday Inn Express near the airport, using the last $300 on his debit card. Work was a daily humiliation. At 10 o'clock every morning his phone rang. It was the new executive assistant. The formidable Henry Stanford, it turned out, was the new director of operations. His old role was now filled by a sharp woman named Patricia. "Miss Harrison requires an update on Project Clean Broom, Mr. Coleman." He had to personally bring his files to the 88th floor. For the first time, he tried to talk to her. "Elizabeth, please," he begged, standing in the doorway of her new office. It had been redecorated. Gone was the old dark wooden furniture from the bachelor party. Now it was minimalist, modern, with glass, steel, and a huge abstract painting. "This is Miss Harrison," she said, not looking up from the report. "Is the file ready?" "Elizabeth, the children. What about the children? You can't just take them." She finally looked up. Her eyes weren't angry, they were just tired. "I'm not taking them, Roger. I'm protecting them. From you. From the example you set. They're with my mother at Kenilworth. They're fine. You, on the other hand, are late with your report." "This is crazy. You can't do this." "I'm your husband. You," she said, standing up, "are the employee who committed wire fraud. You're a liability. I've graciously decided to manage from within the company. Don't ever mistake this for a family squabble. This is a corporate restructuring. Now put the file on the desk and go back to the 12th floor. You're burning up the daylights." He threw the file on her desk and ran out. But as he waited for the elevator, he heard her voice, clear and strong on the conference call. "Yes, Mr. Bezos, I agree. Drone delivery logistics are key. We're projecting a 200% increase in efficiency by the third quarter." Bezos. She was on a call with... Roger felt sick. He played checkers while she played 3D chess around the world. The final twist came 2 weeks into his tenure. A new employee was assigned to the cubicle next to him. It was Nicole Ashton. She looked terrible. Her high-fashion wardrobe was gone, replaced by a cheap department store pantsuit. Her defiant fire had died down. She didn't look at him. "Nicole," he whispered, horrified. "Shut up, Roger," she hissed, her voice thick with venom. "What? What are you doing here?" "She offered me a deal," Nicole said, her eyes fixed on her new, ancient computer. "Ms. Harrison. She found me. I was about to be evicted. She said she wouldn't sue me for my role in the signing bonus if I came to work here in the archives for minimum wage." Why? Why would she? Nicole finally looked at him. Her eyes were red, but dry and hard. "Because she wants you to have a colleague. She wants you to sit here every day next to the woman you ruined your life for. She wants you to look at me, and she wants me to look at you. And she wants us both to know that she won." Nicole turned back to the screen. "Now leave me alone. I need to alphabetize the invoices from 2010 onwards, and you too." Roger stared at the beige wall of his cubicle. He wasn't just in prison. He was in a specially designed display case at the zoo, and his wife was the zookeeper. The human mind can only withstand so much humiliation before it cracks. Roger Coleman, who defined his entire existence through the reflection he saw in others' eyes, admiration, envy, desire, was now invisible. Or worse, he was an object of pity and contempt. He was trapped. His days were a monotonous cycle of sifting through his own corruption. His nights were spent in a one-room motel apartment by the highway, the smell of industrial bleach clinging to the sheets. He sold his platinum cufflinks for cash. He ate from vending machines. He watched from the 12th floor as Miss Harrison transformed global transit. Memoranda circulated throughout the company. The old guard was eliminated. New, bright and frighteningly competent executives were brought in. Maria Gonzalez's outdated logistics system was torn out and replaced with cutting-edge AI-powered dispatching. The company, which had been bleeding cash, suddenly prospered. Trade publications called her the Iron Lady of Logistics, a visionary. Roger, meanwhile, was cataloguing receipts for champagne he didn't even remember drinking. The greatest torment, however, remained Nicole. She sat 3 meters away from him, a living monument to his failure. They never spoke. The silence between them was thick and toxic, filled with everything he had promised and everything she had lost. He looked at her once, really looked, and felt nothing. The fire, the ambition, the bright red dress all vanished. She was simply a tired, angry woman in a cheap suit, and he realized with a sickening jolt that he had never truly seen her. He had only seen a younger, more flattering mirror of himself. Now the mirror was broken. On a rainy Thursday, 6 weeks after Tea Day, he finally broke. He was heading up to the 88th floor to hand in his weekly confessional file. He'd been reduced to just that, a courier. He stepped into the executive elevator, and just as the doors were closing, a hand shot forward. The doors opened. It was Elizabeth, Miss Harrison. She hadn't seen him since that conference room. For the first time, they were truly alone in a confined space. He carried a stack of beige folders. He smelled faintly of motel soap. She wore an elegant cream dress, holding a thin leather folder. She smelled, as always, of sandalwood and victory. She nodded at him, "Mr. Coleman," and walked in, pressing the button for the private penthouse garage. The doors closed. The elevator began its smooth, silent ascent. The silence was deafening. He could hear her breathing. He could see his own reflection in the polished steel walls, standing next to her. He looked destroyed. And it was in this reflection that something in him broke. "You like it, don't you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. She didn't look at him. "I like the 30% increase in stock price." "No, not this," he spat, gesturing between them. "Me, 12th floor, Nicole, motel, you love this. You love watching me crawl." She turned her head, her gaze slow and analytical. "No, Roger, I don't. I'm disappointed." "Disappointed?" He let out a bark of laughter, a broken, ugly sound. "You ruined my life. You took my job, my home, my children, and you're disappointed." "I'm disappointed," she said, her voice still calm but with a new edge, "that the man I married, the man I built a life with, the man I bore 2 children to, was so weak, so stupid." "I'm not stupid," he roared, his hands clutching the folders. "I built this sales department. I made this company." "I didn't," she snapped, the ice finally cracking, revealing the fire beneath. "You were a parasite, Roger. You fed on my money to look good. You committed fraud to impress a 26-year-old girl with my inheritance. You didn't build anything. You were just a very expensive insect. An insect? His voice rose, echoing in the small space. I loved you. I gave you life. I gave you a home. You gave it to me. She turned to him fully, her eyes blazing. Roger, you gave me nothing. I gave you everything. The penthouse is mine. The cars are mine. Your salary was pennies compared to the dividends I received every quarter. I let you play king because I thought you were a good person underneath all that ego. I was wrong. The elevator slowed as they approached her floor. You want to know what really disappoints me, she said quietly. It's not the cheating. It's not the stealing. It's that you were so predictable, so banal. The young mistress in the red dress, the fake bills. Roger, you're a cliché. You're a badly written TV drama. And I wasted 10 years of my life believing you were more than that. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. She walked out, then turned around, holding the doors open with her hand. Your report is 2 days overdue, Mr. Coleman. Patricia will have it on my desk by the end of the day. Don't make me remind you again. The doors closed. Roger was alone. He looked at his reflection in the doorway. His face was stained with tears. He didn't even realize he was crying. He was not a king. He never was. He was a jester. And the joke was on him. The months crept by. Autumn gave way to winter. Snow fell on Chicago in soft, silent blankets, covering the city like a shroud. Roger Coleman existed in the grey purgatory of the 12th floor, a ghost in his own life. But as his world shrank, Elizabeth Harrison's world expanded. Under her leadership, Global Transit Solutions transformed itself from a dying giant into a rising industry star. She cut redundancy, invested in technology, and, most importantly, restored the company's integrity. Clients who had fled during the chaos of the acquisition returned. New clients lined up. She gave interviews to the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Bloomberg. A photograph of Elizabeth Harrison in a navy blue suit, arms crossed, against the backdrop of the Chicago skyline, graced the cover of Fortune with the headline, Queen of Logistics, How Elizabeth Harrison Saved an Empire of Billions. The article began. Most people inherit companies. Elizabeth Harrison is hunting them. Roger read this article in the waiting room of a free medical clinic where he was awaiting treatment for a stomach ulcer he'd developed. He looked at a photo of his wife, his ex-wife, he corrected himself. The divorce papers had arrived in the 3rd month, delivered by courier to his motel. He hadn't even fought them. What could he offer? He couldn't afford a lawyer. He couldn't afford anything. He signed them in the motel lobby with a pen the front desk clerk had lent him. Children. He'd seen his children once since tea day. A supervised visit in the park, overseen by Elizabeth's lawyer. His son Ethan, 10, looked at him with a strange mixture of confusion and fear. His daughter Lily, 7, simply cried and demanded her mother. "Dad, why don't you live with us any more?" Ethan asked. Roger opened his mouth, closed it. What could he say? Dad stole Grandpa's money. Dad cheated on Mum. Dad was a bad man. Daddy made mistakes, he muttered. Mum said you did bad things at work, Ethan said, his young voice accusing. She said you weren't honest. Roger looked across the park. Elizabeth's lawyer stood by a tree watching, checking the time. An hour. That was all he was allowed. 60 minutes every 2 months. Mum's right, Roger whispered. Dad wasn't honest. After this visit, Ethan asked that future visits be cancelled. He felt uncomfortable, the lawyer said. Children need stability. Roger didn't fight it. On the 12th floor, the work was finally nearing completion. Project Clean Broom was nearly catalogued. Every forged invoice, every stolen dollar, every lie documented in excruciating detail. This was his confession, his repentance, written in his own hand. His phone rang on a rainy February morning. "Mr. Coleman, Miss Harrison would like to see you in her office." "Now." Roger's heart stopped. This was the day she would fire him, the day his sentence would end. He picked up the last folder, the final report from Project Clean Broom, and headed for the elevator. His hands were shaking. Elizabeth's office on the 88th floor became even more impressive. A large light wood desk, the walls lined with awards and certificates of appreciation. A photograph of her with the mayor, the governor, the senator. Elizabeth Harrison was more than just a business leader. She was a force to be reckoned with. She was sitting at her desk, typing on her laptop. She didn't look up when he entered. "Mr. Coleman, is the project completed?" "Yes," Roger croaked. He placed the folder on her desk. "It's all here. Every invoice, every transaction, everything." She opened the folder. She leafed through it slowly, methodically. The minutes dragged on. The only sound was the rustling of paper and the distant hum of the city below. Finally, she closed the folder. She folded her hands and looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time in months. "Good work, Mr. Coleman. Thorough. You'll be pleased to know that our legal department used your research to recover most of the stolen funds. The company recovered nearly 90%. You helped save global transit." Roger blinked. Was that praise? "I will also recommend to the state's attorney that no criminal charges be filed against you," she continued. "Given your cooperation and," she paused, "your obvious remorse, I believe prison is unnecessary. You've paid your debt." Roger's chest tightened. He wasn't going to jail. "You're fired, Mr. Coleman. Today is your last day. Here it is, the guillotine. Security will escort you out of the building. Your personal belongings from the booth have been packed." She pushed a small cardboard box across the table. Inside was his old calculator, a cheaply framed photo of his children he'd bought at the drugstore, and his name badge. He looked at the box. It was all that was left. All he had to show for 15 years in corporate America. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice breaking. "Miss Harrison," she corrected. "Miss Harrison, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't make it right, but I need you to know, Tears stung his eyes. "I ruined everything. I ruined us. I ruined our children. I was selfish and weak, and I—" "Stop," she said quietly. Her face was unreadable. "Roger, I don't want your apologies. I don't want your tears. I wanted you to understand that actions have consequences, to understand that people aren't toys, to understand that you weren't the center of the universe." She stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out before her, an endless mesh of life and light. "When we first met, I thought you had potential. I thought there was something real beneath the ambition. I loved you, Roger. I truly loved you. But the person I loved didn't exist. It was a role you were playing." She turned back to him. "This last year wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And it was about teaching you something you never learned. humility, accountability, honesty. Roger wiped his eyes with his sleeve. What do I do now? Elizabeth walked back to her desk. She pulled an envelope out of the drawer and handed it to him. There's a letter of recommendation inside. It doesn't sugarcoat things. It tells the truth. You made mistakes, you've corrected them, and you're capable of doing good work under proper supervision. There's also a check for $20,000. It's not a gift, it's a loan. You'll pay it back when you're back on your feet. Roger looked at the envelope as if it were a trap. Why? Why are you? Because, despite everything, you are the father of my children. And because I want them to know that their father was able to change, was able to become a better person, even if it took draconian measures to get him there. She sat back down, her posture as rigid and controlled as always. Now get out of my office, Roger, and try for once to be the man you've always pretended to be. Roger Coleman stood on the sidewalk in front of the Global Transit Tower, clutching his small box under his arm. It was drizzling. A cold February wind blew off the lake, cutting through his cheap jacket. He looked up at the tower, at the reflective glass that disappeared into the low clouds. Somewhere up there, on the 88th floor, Elizabeth Harrison was building an empire. And he? He stood on the sidewalk with $20,000, a letter of recommendation, and a burden of shame he would carry for the rest of his days. But there was something else too, something small, fragile, a spark of something that might have been hope. Over the next few months, Roger pieced his life back together. He rented a small one-bedroom apartment in Pilsen, a working-class neighbourhood far removed from the glitz of the penthouse. He found a job, not in sales, not in a tower office. He took a job as a logistics consultant at a small trucking company's city routes. The pay was a quarter of what he once earned, but it was honest work. The owner, a man named Frank Rivers, read Elizabeth's letter of introduction and gave Roger a long, measuring look. She says you screwed up. Big time. Yes, sir. She also says you fixed it. Is that true? I tried, sir. Frank nodded. Everyone deserves a second chance, kid. But only one. Don't make me regret it. I won't force you. And he didn't force it. Roger worked quietly, diligently. He didn't brag. He didn't cut corners. He arrived early, left late. He listened more than he spoke. He relearned to work not for glory, but for purpose. He began seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Maria Sanchez, who gently but firmly helped him unravel years of ego and self-deception. You built your identity on external validation, she said during one session. When that validation disappeared, you collapsed. Your task now is to find value within yourself. Not in titles, not in a salary, not in what people think, in who you are when no one is looking. Slowly, painfully, Roger began to change. He began to reconnect with his children. At first, it was short phone calls, awkward and tense. Then weekend visits. He took them for pizza, to the movies. He didn't try to buy their love. He was just there, real, honest. Dad, Ethan said one day as they walked along the embankment, Mum says you work hard, that you're trying to be a better person. Roger swallowed hard. I'm trying, buddy. I like it, Ethan said. This you seem real. It was the best compliment Roger had ever received. He paid off Elizabeth's loan at $200 a month. It would take years, but he did it. He sent each check with a short note. No excuses, simply, "Thank you, R. Coleman." 8 months later, he received a reply. Not from Elizabeth, but from her assistant. The envelope contained a photograph. Elizabeth was at the podium, receiving an award from the Chicago Chamber of Commerce. Beside her, smiling, were Ethan and Lily. On the back of the photograph, in Elizabeth's handwriting, was written, "They are proud of me. One day, if you keep up the good work, they will be proud of you again. Keep moving forward. E." Roger placed the photograph on his small desk in his one-room apartment. It was a reminder, not of what he had lost, but of what he could still become. 2 years have passed since Tea-Day. Elizabeth Harrison stood in the same conference room on the 88th floor where she had once revealed Roger's world. But today, the atmosphere was different. There was no fear, no panic, only the quiet, confident hum of success. She looked at her new management team, smart, ethical, and dedicated people. They had just closed the largest contract in global transit's history, a partnership with 3 of North America's largest retail chains. "Great job, team," she said. "Take tomorrow off. You've earned it." When the room emptied, Henry Stanford, her loyal COO and mentor, remained. "You're thinking about him," Henry said. Elizabeth looked at him, surprised. "About who?" "About Roger." She sat up, sighing. "Sometimes." "I got my last loan payment last week. He finished paying it off early." Henry nodded. "Frank Rivers called me. He wanted to know if we would mind if he promoted Roger to regional manager. He said Roger was his best employee. Honest, hard-working, humble." Elizabeth blinked. "Modest? Roger?" "People change, Elizabeth. You gave him a reason to change." She stood up and went to the window. The city stretched out before her, eternal and indifferent. "I didn't want to destroy him, Henry. I wanted him to understand that actions have consequences, that people aren't things to be manipulated." And he understood. You taught him the greatest lesson a man can learn: humility. It hurts, but it lasts forever. Elizabeth turned to Henry. "Do you think I was too cruel?" Henry smiled, a sad, wise smile. "I think you were fair. Cruelty would have meant leaving him as he was, arrogant, dishonest, destructive. You broke him. But you also gave him the tools to rebuild himself. That's not cruelty. That's love. Harsh, but love." Elizabeth said nothing. She was thinking about the man she once loved, the man who was both the best mistake and the greatest lesson of her life. "The kids see him regularly now," she said quietly. "Ethan says his dad has changed, that he listens, that he apologizes when he makes mistakes." "Then you win, Elizabeth, not just in the boardroom, but where it really matters." She nodded slowly. Yes, maybe she had won. Not the triumph of crushing an enemy, but a deeper, more complex victory, giving someone a chance to be better. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Another incredible story awaits you in the next video.